And I'm Clay McCoy. I work in engineering tools at Netflix.
And I'm going to repeat that only because I got a ding just now from the Google interface that said, your broadcast is now live, and it was after I introduced myself. So hello again. In case you're just joining us, this is the Asgard Show, episode 1. I'm Joe Sandow, and we are in Building C of Netflix headquarters in different conference rooms so that we don't interfere with each other's microphones. And we have some whiteboards behind us in case we feel like writing anything down, and just to give you a flavor of what we're up to at Netflix. Arrested Development was one of our recent original series, or at least the season of it was, and tonight is Netflix's next original series premiere, which is called Orange is the New Black, which I personally think is actually
And I'm Clay McCoy.
Our best one so far.
In engineering tools at Netflix.
I'm sorry. There is that was the YouTube beginning, which it's good to know that was actually the beginning of it, and it's on a delay. And it started with Clay introducing himself. So what we're going to do here today is give you an idea of why we're doing the show, what it's about, and what Asgard is, and then we want to take a bunch of your questions and let the audience's concerns drive a lot of what's going to be the content of the show. But we do have a bunch of topics to cover if people just want to sit and listen. So let's see here. We covered Clay. What's behind you there in the room?
Oh, Thor.
Hey, Thor. Thor was a project from. It was a prize from Netflix Hack Day, which we someone was gracious enough to lend us, since our project is Thor themed on purpose. The reason that we're doing Google Hangout like this is really because we do these meetups on premise here in Los Gatos, but not everybody can make it down here, and even if we do, it's pretty crowded. And if we just wanted to get people who are using Asgard or other related Netflix open source projects to have a forum where they can ask us questions. We're planning on doing this monthly on the second Wednesday of the month. We'll post if that schedule is changing, but it looks like it should work pretty well. And we thought we would start by covering a little bit of intro stuff, just to say what Asgard is for people who may or may not be. Oh no, someone on Twitter says the video call is full. Okay, if the video call is full, then tell your friends to watch on YouTube, where it's a public thing. Oh, and that's Peter. Watch on YouTube, Peter. So that's good to know that you can have a really small limit to a Google Hangout.
Yeah.
I thought it was supposed to be more like 30, but it looks like it gets a little sad at 10. So what I will ask is anyone who's watching passively and on the YouTube channel, I'm sorry, in the Google Hangout, and doesn't really want to be in the Google Hangout, they just want to watch, then please hang up and click on the YouTube link instead. Hey, there goes one. Just to make room for anybody who wants to be on camera and wants to be able to ask us questions out loud. And the YouTube equivalent, well, if you found this, I'm sure you found the YouTube equivalent, but I can post it again, which is over here. Just have to get it to not blast my mic. There we go. And it's on a slight delay, so you should see the last few minutes again. But that's the YouTube equivalent if you want to leave the Hangout to let somebody else take up one of these, apparently limited to 10 slots of people talking, which I suppose is reasonable and good to know. So, Clay, we're going to cover what does Asgard do, and why would anyone want to use it? And what is it?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, we're there now. Okay, so what does Asgard do? So Asgard is a web application, and we use it here at Netflix, but it's open source, so everybody can use it, and it makes a lot of the Amazon cloud services easier to use. Pretty easy to use, and maybe even easier than the Asgard console.
You mean the Amazon console?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for catching that. Maybe we're often compared with the Amazon console because we do something kind of similar. The differences are a couple of the differences. We could probably talk for 30 minutes about the differences and why we made Asgard, but a couple of the big ones are that we're centered around ASGs, auto scaling groups. That's a big thing we believe in. Even if you just have one instance, putting it in an auto scaling group gives you some robustness that you wouldn't get otherwise. And auto scaling groups also give you the ability to scale to your whatever metric you care about, maybe traffic. So easier use of ASGs, and we handle the Amazon account credentialing for you so that multiple users can use the same application and not have to worry about passing around different credentials and that sort of thing. We also have a simpler REST API that's pretty nice and will hopefully get even better in the future. And I guess the only other noteworthy thing as an Asgard basic is to talk about Grails a little bit, where it's a web app that's written in Grails, which is a Groovy framework. It's Groovy is a JVM-based language, and Grails is a really nice framework to build a web app in. Very speedy development. Got anything else to cover?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good description, and I'll talk a little bit about the cloud model that Netflix uses and how Asgard plays a role in that. Basically, we use the auto-scaling group, which is an Amazon construct, as a unit of deployment, which means that we're going to have, really, you could have 0 instances, but in practical terms, you have at least 1 instance of your application running in an auto-scaling group. And that lets Amazon take control over launching and terminating your instance. And what you do is tell the auto-scaling group how many instances you should have. Okay, we have a question in the chat room, and we're going to get to questions in just a few minutes. But feel free to post them. That is a good one. Post your questions now if you'd like, and we'll get to them in a couple minutes. And tell us if you would like us to put you on camera, and I'll click the button. So the cloud model goes by launching through auto-scaling groups all of your instances, and then replacing those auto-scaling groups when you're doing an update to your application. And then we want to associate all of your cloud objects, including your auto-scaling groups, your security groups, and your elastic load balancers, with one name, one application, which is owned by your team and has an associated email address, so that people can contact you when they see that there's just all of these elastic load balancers that no one knows whose they are, what they should be doing with these things. If you're in a distributed large system like Netflix with a lot of different teams using a shared cloud account, we found this model to be helpful in terms of like not having a spreadsheet somewhere that's supposed to be the master copy of all of your instances or all of your whatever objects in the cloud and who owns them and what they're for. We use a naming convention which ties everything back to an application and lets people own things. And then we can use things like Janitor Monkey and Conformity Monkey to email those people as part of the Simian Army suite of open source tools, to email people when there's a problem or when something looks like garbage and is going to be cleaned up, to give them an opportunity to say, I don't think you should clean that up, I want to keep that, don't delete it. So the application is the first word in the name of each of the objects that I mentioned, the security group, the elastic load balancer, the auto-scaling group. And then there's a hyphen, which means you cannot put a hyphen in the application name. And then there's other stuff to differentiate the cloud object from other cloud objects that are also owned by the application. Then we also have another abstraction called a cluster. And the cluster is a set of auto-scaling groups. And the way we do this is we simply replace an auto-scaling group with a new auto-scaling group with a similar name that has a version number that increments each time you do this. And we ignore the version number, and we just take the first part of the auto-scaling group names, and we call that the cluster. And if you've used Asgard, you've probably gotten to the cluster screen and seen how you could have like 2 different auto-scaling groups under the same cluster. And this lets you tell your application through user data injection, which is how Amazon launches instances with information about their context. You can have environment variables in your instances that know which cluster you're in, even as your auto-scaling group changes over time. So our naming conventions they're, in one sense, they're a hack, because really it would be nice if the cloud simply provided all of these things for you, but it doesn't. Amazon's growing very fast. They have lots of functionality, and everybody has to build on top of it, and we have to go fast too. We can't just wait for them to invent everything we can think of. So we have to, build on top of what they've given us. They've given us an infrastructure as a service, and we are going steps towards making it a platform as a service in the style that works for us at our scale. And with our sense of organization and our sense of freedom and responsibility that is the Netflix cultural mantra. So we have because of all these naming conventions and the fact that it's useful for other systems to know how these things work, how applications relate to autoscaling groups and to clusters and to elastic load balancers. We have an open source library called Frigga, which is the mythological queen of Asgard. And that is a parsing library that just takes strings in and strings out, and strings in and objects out to differentiate, to parse the autoscaling group names and the cluster names and figure out what the relationships are, so that other open source projects and closed source projects can also use the same logic without duplicating it. Even though the logic seems sort of simple, it's just nice not to have all the different cases handled where you're not sure which characters are allowed in each token and everything. So that's the basics of what Asgard is, and I know that some of you are like, yeah, why am I hearing this? I know all this already. I've been using Asgard, and that's cool. But there's probably some people who are kind of just want to know what is the basis of what we're talking about here, and then we can get into some of the advanced stuff. And I see so far we have a couple of questions already in the chat room here. Do you guys, Andrew, do you want to be on camera to ask your question and talk with us? You have a camera. Either way. Okay. All right. We're going to start some questions here. So that's pretty good. We got through the intro in 10 minutes.
Hey Joe, you've got some really good images that show in one of your presentations that do a good job of displaying that. I don't know if you have it up.
I was thinking about some of that.
You can put it in the show notes anyway.
That's true. I could put it in the show notes. We'll put the show notes on the YouTube description for this video once it's uploaded. And that'll include links to some slide decks and some presentations that I've done about exactly what I've been talking about. This is maybe a little bit confusing since I didn't really draw it out. What are the names? But the pictures help, yeah. So let's see here. So the way Google Hangout works is whoever's making the most noise gets the big camera. So Andrew Spiker, I just turned on your camera and hopefully your mic, so you can feel free to ask your favorite question.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, so the first question I had there was the startup time. So I typically take my Asgard, I've just got one Asgard server. I tend to shut it down, stop it overnight, and then start it back up in the morning, and it's probably the thing that starts up the slowest. And I see it downloading a bunch of stuff from AWS and whatnot. I did see an option on the forums or something like that about being able to skip the caching and let you write in. I'm just wondering what the best practices are for someone that's using it sort of in a development environment, wants to be able to start it and stop it rather quickly.
Why not just keep it running?
Just cost. Just trying to shut it down so it doesn't run overnight when I'm not actually using it. I'm not using it as a production environment yet.
Mm-hmm. So cost because you're running it on an Amazon Asgard.
Yeah.
So the practice that I recommend for, well, we can get to the specific caching stuff about Asgard and stuff, but really for shutting things down at night when you're very cost conscious, what I recommend is don't launch it as an instance, but because then it's up to you to turn the lights off, and it's up to you to turn it back on in the morning. But then when you come in, you have to push the button to turn it on, and then you have to wait, instead of having it automatically just be there, already cache loaded, already ready for you, 20 minutes before you sit down at your desk. And you can do that with scheduled actions, which you can set up through Asgard. Mm-hmm. So if instead of launching an instance, you use an auto-scaling group with size 1 or 0, and then you put your Asgard AMI in there and it's all ready to go, then you set a scheduled action that at certain cron job values, certain times of the day or the week, you want your size of your ASG to become 1. And other times of the day or week, you want it to become 0. Then it will automatically shut down at night, saving money. And before you come in the morning, it'll already be at size 1, and it will have its whatever it needs, 20 minutes or something, 5 minutes, to do all of its cache loading. so you won't even notice it. You'll just get charged that extra little bit that you kind of want to get charged something. You want to have that hour where it's doing whatever it has to do to fill its caches so that you don't have to spend your expensive time sitting there staring at it, waiting for it to start, if you want the caches loaded before you use it, which I recommend, especially if you have more than one person using it. If it's just you and you know the ins and outs and you're reading the log and you can tell that the caches aren't loaded yet and it's not a big deal, then just skip cache loading all the time and be aware that you'll have empty lists and you have to wait for some of them to become filled. But if you have more than one user, if you're the administrator of Asgard, like Clay and I are the administrators of Asgard at Netflix, as well as the developers, we have 100 people at Netflix all using it, and it's up to us to make it presentable all the time. So they have to go to it, and they shouldn't see empty lists. So if you have other people, depending on the appearance of Asgard and the fact that they'll be a little shocked to see all their clusters are gone that they just made yesterday. That's not desirable. So I would think a best practice is to have it cache loaded before other people get to see it, because otherwise they'll be disappointed and a little bit alarmed. But turning the lights off at night is a good idea, and there's no reason not to.
Hey, Joe, I was going to add a little bit of information about the caches background. So the reason that we cache all the data is to make it so we're not having to call Amazon as much and we don't get throttled. And that's really handy. That's actually another reason that Asgard exists. And kind of as a rule of thumb, if you're looking at some sort of list screen where you see a lot of things, we're probably pulling that from the caches, and it may be probably around 2 minutes behind. We're refreshing those caches a lot of times every 2 minutes. If you are at a screen where you're looking for something at a specific item, we're probably pulling a fresh one for that. That's the reason some people see maybe something slightly behind in a list view. And it's the list views that won't necessarily be populated, maybe not all of them, if you skip caches. But eventually they'll all be there.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you're saying if you bookmark the
yeah. If you bookmark a specific item, that'll show right up. That's not dependent on caches.
That's true. And the exception would be if a specific item like a cluster had some dependence on a different cache, and you're basically not seeing all of the details of all of the inner objects because they're not cached yet, you might see an incomplete view of the object.
When people ask questions, can we get them to talk a little bit about how they're using Asgard, maybe?
That is a really good point. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, I think we lost Andrew.
Uh-oh.
Andrew, are you still? Andrew is no longer watching, and maybe he got kicked off. I'm not sure. But Peter asked a question in the chat room. Turning off the lights, what runs that cron? Is it Asgard itself? But before we get to that question, I want to respect the line and go to Marcus's question here, which Marcus is still in the room, I hope. Yes, he is. He doesn't have a camera at the moment. Do you, Marcus, have a camera? Would you like me to? Okay. Let me see what happens if I show Marcus in the broadcast. No camera. Okay.
Maybe he could ask the question. Well,
he put it in the chat room.
He's got an audio.
Audio?
Oh, back. Andrew's back.
Oh,
hey, Andrew's back. So we could go back and get him, pick up where we left off with him. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Andrew is back on the air here. So, so Andrew, were your concerns addressed, or is there anything else that you want to talk about?
No,
in terms of the caching thing.
No, I think it was answered. I guess my question is it really pulling down that much information, or are you like throttling it and that's why it's taking so long? I mean, I've got a cluster of like, I've probably got 3 clusters, have 2 things in each cluster, two instances in each cluster. I mean, it's a very small amount of information. It's surprising how long it takes to get ready. And I didn't know if that was, the instance. I'm running it on like an M1 medium. It's not huge, but it's surprisingly, it's probably 3-4 minutes before it's ready to start letting me use it.
It can take up a lot of memory. Do you know if you're
Yeah,
close to any kind
yeah.
of?
I've given it the max memory for the instance, and you know, it's an M1 medium, 64-bit. So it's, I think I've given it the memory. It's just
Right.
Yeah,
I've been
that's not the
meaning.
problem. I think
Okay.
that what the problem is that we coded it with large scale in mind, and Amazon is very, very careful. Well, it's two concerns. There's 2 points of limitation. One is Amazon's APIs. If we call them too rapidly, then they penalize your account, and you can no longer call Amazon for a while. So we're very tentative about how often we call Amazon. The other is just Asgard's threads. When we have a lot of cache filling to do, we don't want to tie up too many threads, and we do want to have them kind of, well, we've limited the thread pool of how much gets used for cache loading, but we have a bit of jitter so that we don't have these huge spikes of behavior during cache loading when we have like now maybe like 30 different caches all loading separately in their own behavioral virtual thread, sort of their own timer task. And if a lot of them were to run at the same time, it could hit Amazon as a problem if too many of them were calling the same service, and it also could hit some kind of resource constraint within your instance or within your JVM. So we have some jitter, which is a little bit of offset at the time, and that causes us to be a little bit more tentative about how we're loading data especially like when you're starting out loading. It waits for the last one to be done before it will say, okay, everything's good now. Now you can use the application, even if the last one is something you don't care about at all.
Yeah, it would seem like it would seem like for the use case, I'm kind of using it in a weird way of how you typically use it, but for the use case of someone trying to get started with like a small environment, it'd be nice to have maybe a feature request that it stores away the cache between runs and refreshes it to see if it's up to date once you restart it, kind of thing, which may work for this kind of environment, which is a little different than I guess what you guys run.
Maybe. So I would prefer to avoid having a cache that's super stale and assuming that it's correct, because part of our sort of contract with the user is that all the caches that need to be up to date, they're no more than 2 minutes old. And the ones that are kind of rare to change, like the list of availability zones, those are only 1 hour old. They're not from yesterday. And to show them from yesterday to a user, not to the administrator like you, but to one of your users once your organization grows and you have more people using the cloud, it's a little bit of a lie. It's a little bit of I would say, dangerous confusion to show stuff that really a different Asgard instance deleted, or someone deleted during the night using a different mechanism, and that it's like many hours stale. The other thing is just the complexity of having a cache layer level cache layer there to start using the things early, just to avoid the 3 or 4 minute startup time, because I think that the startup time isn't so critical that it's worth the investment of all that extra upkeep for that technology.
Yeah, I think you've answered the question pretty clear. It's just the way I'm using it as a single user at small scale at this point. It's a minor annoyance. If I was using it in a real production environment, I don't think I'd worry about this at all.
To address your real problem, which is not about whether the cache is on disk or not, the real problem is the startup time is just too damn long. And the way I fixed that for the offline mode, which I use for just GUI changes, basically just development time, is I just turn jitter off. And if I think what you would want for your tiny little scale is don't be so worried about how often you're calling Amazon and how often you're using threads. Just give a startup flag that says don't use jitter, or use the tiniest amount of jitter and the tiniest amount of delay, and just make everything just go. Just get the caches, don't worry about it. And that would just be something, a feature request that you could open on GitHub. And if you know anybody who knows Java or Groovy, they could implement it and send us a pull request. And we can talk on the GitHub ticket about what you'd want, like how to find the code that you want to change to do that. And then actually, we've had this brings us to the topic of contributions and of open source contributions from other people. there's Netflix is currently running a cloud prize competition with a $10,000 cash prize and another $10,000 value thing of being sent to AWS reInvent conference, and there aren't a lot of submissions yet. So it's not. It may sound like, well, someone else is going to get it. That's really hard. There's not a lot of submissions worth looking at so far, and it ends, I believe, in September. So so if you do something like this and you actually submit it to the Cloud Prize as an entry, then there's also a good chance that getting some money out of it. Let me move on to the next question here, which is from Marcus.
If we could get just a little bit of information about how Andrew's using it, it's clear he's using it as a single user. Are you evaluating it for your company? What are you doing, and what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, I actually work for IBM, okay. And we're looking at it in extension to some of our cloud platforms as well. So that's the whole platform is very cool. We've actually got a sample out there on GitHub under my account of another sample application using Asgard and Eureka and Ribbon and Carry On and a bunch of other technologies. So we're learning it fairly quickly here.
Cool. What do you think you're going to be using it for? Or is that top secret?
No, I mean, we're just looking at it in the context of cloud platforms. So definitely just looking at it in a researchy mode right now.
Cool. Would you put a link to your project that uses
Sure.
all those Netflix things? Just put it in the chat room, and I'll add it to the show notes.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to turn Andrew's camera off and go to Marcus Kroger, who I believe didn't have a camera. Marcus, do you have a microphone? Perhaps. What happens if I put Marcus's? No, Mike, sorry. Okay. So Marcus's question, Clay, why don't you read that one?
Okay, the dev phase attribute of an ASG appears to not help produce a unique ASG name. Okay, so yeah, that's the same. Okay.
Read the whole thing, because the audience see the...
Oh yeah, there's people that can't read the text. So an XYZ-D stage is the same as an XYS-D prod. Is this the way it's intended? Stack-free form detail both help produce a unique name, so I'm wondering if this is a bug.
Sounds like a bug.
Sounds like a bug.
Oh yeah, okay. Marcus says, sorry, that should have been XYZ-D prod. So Marcus, okay. You're saying that you're referring to the many little components of an ASG name that are available in Asgard, right. Some of which are still a bit Netflix specific, and that eventually needs to be less so, so that it's more customizable, or so that you can at least get rid of the ones that don't interest you. But they should all result in, and if you're finding that there's some still present that on the create autoscaling group page, and they don't contribute to the name, then that's a bug. And I would request that you get on GitHub an issue and tell us the bug. Tell us what your case was. I'm just seeing if I can very briefly demonstrate it. It shouldn't be D prod, it should be D0 prod. So I'm wondering what the nature of the bug is, because I'm seeing that it seems to work when I do it, which means that there's what's going on under the hood here. And if I actually make it, I'm just going to take 1 second to finish making this and see if I get what I expect. All right, so here's what I'm going to say. Works for me, which is the worst thing I could say. But the problem is that if it works for me, then I have no idea why it doesn't work for you. So so please open a GitHub issue, and with as much detail as you can, explaining specifically what you did on the page and specifically what you see as a result, because I don't see the problem when I try it. So there may be something in the configuration. He says, yes, D0 prod, same here. We'll provide details in GitHub issue. Thanks. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Marcus. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, Andrew has another question. I'm going to let you answer it, so I'll read the question. And I actually read this one ahead, so I can deliver it a little better. So this is about the Asgard and Eureka integration. And I could see a lot of people having questions about that. And you should answer this, Joe, because you have been kind of working on a blog post that explains the integration between Asgard and Eureka, right?
Yeah.
So
I have. This is my work in progress. So Andrew, let me put Andrew back on camera here. Andrew, can I put you back on camera? I don't think he'll mind. Andrew, you're back on camera. You're live on the Asgard show. Your question was about Eureka, and maybe you just want to say in your own words. Well, you already did in the chat room, but in your own verbal words, what's the problem?
It's not a problem. It's just getting an explanation. So far, I'm kind of using Eureka and Carry On and Ribbon all together. In an application architecture sense, and I'm using Asgard to deploy clusters of services that are using that configuration. So far, I can't quite tell that Eureka is conversing with Asgard or vice versa, but I do see that they have some sort of integration. I'm trying to understand what that integration should be beyond what I've done so far.
Okay. So yes, that's all going to be answered in the blog post. I'm wondering if I should write on the whiteboard, because you can sort of see the whiteboard. Basically, if you haven't done anything, if you're not sure how Asgard and Eureka are talking together, but you launched both of them, then I could be pretty sure that they're not talking to each other, because you would have known that you had to do something to do that. There is a wiki page on the Asgard wiki on GitHub talking about how to set up your integration point between Asgard and Eureka. But I haven't added it to the side of the list of links yet. It's just if you go to the wiki and look through the list of wiki pages, it's there. You have to change your config file, your .asgard/config.groovy file, to tell Asgard where to find Eureka in each of your regions. And then Eureka gives you all these extra powers. It lets you do health checks on your instances during deployment, or when you're looking at certain pages in Asgard, and it lets you turn instances on and off, in which is the words are up and out of service. So you can use Asgard as a control, not just for elastic load balancers in Amazon, but for Eureka state in Eureka, which is basically Eureka is functionally similar to a load balancer. And because you're using Ribbon and Carry On, those are supposed to be able to communicate with your Eureka server and determine which instances should receive traffic and which ones should not. More importantly, the Eureka client does that. Carry On and Ribbon are more about getting the traffic actually to the other place, to the other dependency, from one instance to the other, and about making it easier to start things up and have Eureka Client do its job. So are you using Eureka Client?
So right now what I'm doing is using Carry On to register services as they start up in their containers into Eureka, and then having Carry On look up, or the configuration for Carry On, having the lookup for the services that a consuming service would bind to. So I basically have a web app talking to a microservice, and as I understand it, Carry On is doing the registration in Eureka and providing that into Ribbon for the load balancing.
Right. And then Ribbon should be doing the actual transfer of the request.
Correct.
From one instance to the other. So what you're probably missing now is visibility of the Eureka state within Asgard.
Right.
And to do that, you can look at the wiki now, and I'll be working on the blog post doing all this diagrams of how these things relate to each other. I'm getting an echo. I might have to have somebody mute me.
Yeah, it seems to be Andrew's mic has some kind of feedback.
Oh, okay. Google Hangout's not perfect. They're supposed to be removing that stuff. Not all the time. Okay. So you can find that. I can post a link here for you. So, talking about if I go to here, there's Eureka integration.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And we got where you're using Asgard, which is at IBM for experimental use. So
maybe we can talk to Peter now. He's got two questions that are pretty relevant.
I'm gonna mute Andrew now, and Peter, or should we talk to Marcus first? Oh no, we did talk to Marcus.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go to Peter. Peter, I think I met Peter. Okay, hey Peter, you're on the air. Would you like me to remove you from the air? Peter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Yep. Hi, Peter. Yeah, we met at I don't know, some conference. You're doing the AWS Answers.
That's the one. Yes.
You did. So you asked about turning off the lights. What runs that cron?
Right. So you mentioned earlier that there's a scheduled process that you can have that will bring up the instance that Andrew wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But is it Asgard that's actually running that cron process?
No, it is not.
Those
it
are
is not a
scheduled
scheduling system. Yeah, Clay, you implemented that. Go ahead. How does it work?
Yeah. So an ASG has various mechanisms to grow or shrink. One of those is scaling policies, which are rules that maybe it's looking for some kind of metric, and depending, say traffic, for instance, and if that goes up a certain amount or down, it knows to grow or shrink, to add more or remove some instances from the ASG, right? There's another mechanism called scheduled actions that also can control the size of your ASG, but it can do it at certain times. So you can create both of those on an ASG in Asgard. They're both, we're just giving you a web application that allows you to create Amazon objects. They're Amazon objects. But yeah, there's no real cron. It's just you can go onto the ASG and add a scheduled action that says scale this ASG up to this amount at this time, and you can give it give it to it in a cron format, right? But it's Amazon that's handling it. We just give you the ability to enter it.
Cool. I didn't know that existed. Awesome.
Yeah, and it's in the current interface right now. And so yeah, if that answered that question, you had another one. And this kind of hits home with us. You're asking about that you heard that Asgard here doesn't actually run in the cloud, and yeah, you're right. And Joe will probably elaborate on this, but to get into the cloud, Asgard was one of the first applications that helped us get there, and this is something that we're pretty imminently wanting to do. Is to get Asgard always running in the cloud, but the what we keep saying around here is it's like the mechanic that never gets a chance to work on his own car.
Sure,
but we will. Yeah.
So do you have an idea about how you're going to run it? Is it just going to be like, could you use Asgard to deploy itself? And
oh yeah, we talked about that. Joe's actually working on that really soon, right, Joe?
Yeah, it's one of the things whenever business concerns kind of get a little bit quieter, and I get back to like, well, what's really bothering me right now? Mm-hmm. It's that Asgard's not in the cloud, and that our deployment process is a little hacky, and that our maintenance is a little bit of a problem. If we have an instance with bad RAM or something, we shouldn't have to care about that. We should replace the instance and throw it away. But right now we spend a little bit too much time managing these perfect snowflakes in the data center that we'd love to get rid of.
Yes.
Snowflakes are bad.
Yes. Do we get enough information about how Peter's using Asgard?
Not really. Peter.
So I've used Asgard in the past at previous companies. Now I'm a consultant, so I don't have an instance of Asgard running myself. But I am always keeping up to date with everything that you guys are releasing. So one of the things that I've just done is released a bunch of Asgard playbooks in Ansible and then an AMI, which, Joe, you said you're going to release as well. Are you going to release just the AMIs, or the sort of, how to actually go and make those AMIs as well?
Good question. I believe we're just going to release the AMIs.
Okay.
And it's actually on my agenda this afternoon to review somebody else's work who's finished making an Asgard AMI for the public in our new open source account. So that should get released this week. and it in time for next week's meetup in Los Gatos.
Great, thanks.
And you can always run Asgard on your laptop if you don't want to spend the money on having an instance. If you just want to tinker with it, it does mean that you have to interface with your own account, which doesn't cost any money until you make stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make small things, it doesn't cost too much.
Right.
So while you're on camera, Peter, was there any other question that you had at the moment?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Hey, Joe, why don't we give a quick explanation about stacks and then bring Carl on?
We can. There was somebody else had a question, I thought. Yeah, Alan
Okay.
did. Then we could bring. I know. Hi, Carl. Carl's here. I see a little tiny grayed out Carl at the bottom. About stacks. Well, I want to get to this other guy's question first, which was Alan Williams. Alan, are you still around? Yes. Alan, I'm going to put you on camera. Tell me if you want me to take you off camera.
There he is.
All right, I hear you. Hey, Alan.
Hey there.
Okay, there you are. So you had a couple questions in the chat room, which rather than read them, I'm going to let you read them.
Yeah, sure. So,
Could you first tell us what you do or what you're using Asgard for, or where you work?
so I work at Autodesk as an infrastructure architect, and we're looking for ways to automate how we can provision or better manage AWS accounts. Because right now we have an account tied to an app, and it's just really hard to manage it. Originally, we had one AWS account with multiple users, but that was also not very easy to manage. So we were looking at Asgard to see if it can help us out. And you mentioned how everything is, like all your ASGs, the basic foundation is really the app. So my question is, does the app tie to a specific AWS account, or are you using one AWS account that you're sharing across all the apps?
We have the app is something that's in a database in one account. And if you want to have the same app in two different accounts, like a test account and a prod account, then you have to create the same app in both accounts separately. But you can have an unlimited number of apps within an account.
Okay. And my second question is, so users of that one app, can they see the ASGs for another app?
Yes.
So basically, are they contained, or do they see everything at Netflix?
They see everything if they want to see everything, or they limit their view to just their stuff if they want to limit their view.
Okay. Can the admin limit that view?
The admin currently cannot limit the view. The reason that the things are the way they are in Asgard is because of it's born out of Netflix's culture and the needs to satisfy the way that we have figured out how to use the cloud. Our culture is based on the mantra of freedom and responsibility. So rather than getting a lot of processes in place to tell people to fill out this form if you want permission to do something, we basically just say we want to make sure that we know who's doing what. Pretty much, we trust our employees, and we want them to just be free to go do what they got to do, and not feel like they have to go, get triple signatures on things and slow themselves down when they have a job to do and they know what they're doing, and we just want to let them go do it, provided that there aren't legal impediments. So we have a third account in Amazon with a separate Asgard instance that's our segregated account with very little in it. And it's just the stuff that's under legal compliance that has to be protected from having too many people have access to it. But our prod account is deliberately designed not to contain things like that. So any employee at Netflix can access any object in the cloud in production or test so that they can do their job, whatever their job might be. And it's up to them to know how to do the right thing rather than having a lot of checks in place to make sure that nobody can be malicious or incredibly stupid. They have to think about it themselves and take the responsibility. That said, once we finish better authentication and with real lockdown rest points, and then authorization, it could be possible to have whole swaths of the cloud be limited to certain groups who are like in Active Directory LDAP. They're in some special group that allows them access to these objects. At Netflix, we're less concerned with that, so it may turn into something that we need to get people like yourself from the user community to contribute code back to make that a reality once we have more authentication and authorization stuff, unless you want to contribute some of that as well. But
Okay.
that's the long answer. But it's an important question. It's some stuff that I did want to talk about is our culture and why Asgard is so open. Once you turn it on, it's kind of like, well, now everybody can do everything. That's kind of by design.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Sure. Did you have another question? I think that was...
Yeah, that was it. Those
that
were
was
the
your
two
question.
questions. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Oh, Marcus wanted to talk about stack, yeah. So I'm going to turn Alan off here. And Marcus said, how do you use the stack attribute of an ASG at Netflix? Good question. Clay, you want me to talk about stack? Or you want to talk about stack?
Well, I wrote a little answer on here,
Go.
just saying that well, I learned a lot about stacks when we were implementing our INT stack, which I should be able to talk about that a little bit, right?
Oh yeah.
Just so you can imagine we've got all kinds of services out in the account, and how do you and you've got different versions of the application out there. How do you control which like you've got services stacked on services, and they all talk to each other. How do you control which of those services actually talk to each other? You can't just be throwing all these services out and have them talk to each other at random. So we have one important stack called the integration stack, and the idea is even though there's lots of each of these services out in the account that could potentially talk to each other, the stack kind of lines these up, and all the ones with the same stack are this group of services that talk to each other. And when it gets more complicated than just you know, the reason you have multiple services of the same kind is they're probably versioned, and you want to control which version. In the case of integration stack, you want to control which versions of these services all talk to each other to know where a bug came up. And so I explained that applications and stacks are both similar in that they're Netflix conventions on top of Amazon's objects. They're stuff we brought to the table, and they differ in that an application is basically the same code base, things that share similar functionality, whereas a stack is clusters that are going to be talking to each other. I hope that made sense to our watchers. And Joe's drawing a picture.
I'm going to try to draw a picture.
Yeah, pictures would be good for this.
I don't know if this will be visible or not, but we'll see. Well, that's pretty tiny. I should have written bigger. But the gist of what I want to get across here is the two dimensions that Clay's describing are, let's say we have an application which is API and an application which is Asgard. And we also have these stacks, the int stack for integration testing and the prod stack for production deployment. If we were to have the API application running in a cluster for the purposes of the int stack, then we would have an autoscaling group and a cluster by inference, which is called API-int. And the naming convention causes the second token in the hyphen delimited list of tokens to be the stack, and the first token to be the application. And then Asgard, its cluster would be Asgard-int. You could have more dashes and more stuff after it, but the second token is the stack. And then you could have another stack, prod stack, API-prod, Asgard-prod. These can all be in the same account in the same region, and Asgard will know to inject the variables into the instances for those clusters that are your application is API, your stack is int. And then other open source projects from Netflix, such as Ribbon and Carry-On, would be able to be configured for the instances to say, well, where possible, I want my application to try to talk to the int stack, if it's already in the int stack, or if its target is the int stack. And that allows for very complex systems that have a lot of different applications and a lot of dependencies across from each other. Marcus is asking, you use Eureka to connect things that form one stack. That's correct. Eureka and Carry-On and Ribbon are components of the Netflix open source platform that let you direct traffic between instances according to the logic that's inherent to this system when you want to. So when your system gets more complex, you want to be able to slice up your whole system, even if it's 25 layers deep, and say, we want to carve out a piece of that and do it again over here, but in the same region in the same account. But differently, in a different sort of environment. And so that was a question from Marcus, I believe. And Marcus, if you wouldn't mind, since you don't have a mic, just let us know in the chat room, please, how you're using Asgard and what company you're working at. And then we had one other little thing in here from Marcus. Can I do absolutely everything through the API? Manage sequential ASGs? Yes. On the Asgard wiki, there's a page for the REST API, all the recipes of things that are commonly done. If there's something that you can't figure out how to do with the REST API through Asgard and you want, then you can just let us know, open an issue or tweet or open a mention on the Google group, how do I do this with the REST API? And we could probably add to the list of things you can do with the REST API.
You can actually do more with the REST API in some cases. And if you really want to see what you can do, you can look at our controllers in the source code.
That's right. That's how you really learn the REST API. That's how we learn the REST API, because we had to write it for the front end, and we can use it without a browser. So Alan asked, for users working on an app, are they able to see ASGs belonging to another app? We answered that already. The answer is yes. And then Stack, and then what was next in here? Oh, Andrew wanted to know about Stack, which we explained, I think. Andrew, did we explain that well enough? For someone not familiar with stacks, what's a stack? Yes. Okay, good. And then we have a special guest, Carl Quinn from the Java Posse. Hi, Carl.
There he is.
Carl's camera's on, man.
I can unmute.
Hey, Carl.
Am I unmuted now? Oh, cool. Hey.
Yeah. Welcome to your first live broadcast on the internet. No.
Never.
Carl was our boss. He was around when Asgard was invented, and he's since moved on to Riot Games. But he's now using all this stuff and probably learning it even better now that he has to use all of it instead of just owning 1/4 of it.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts going from a guy who managed and I could just hand wave and say, you guys build one of these and one of those, to now I actually have to try to make everything work.
Yeah.
And then spend a lot of time with the Amazon AWS console to try to create. I mean, I'm creating VPCs and Route 53 hookups, and yeah, it's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff that sort of evolved at Netflix over time, and other people did it. You know, IT guys and NetEng and.
So you're going to be presenting next week, right? I'm going to be out of town. Clay will be there.
Yeah.
What are
I
you?
don't have anything put together.
What are your topics, or what are your technologies that you've gotten working so far?
So far I have Asgard was the first thing I brought up and hooked it up to one login. Then I set up Emanator, and mostly some of the DevOps guys on my team figured out how to extend Emanator to work with chef cookbooks. So that is something they've got ready. I think they're figuring out how to contribute it back. So that's where that is. And I also set up ETA and got that working. And then mostly one of the security guys on our team used ETA and really completely fleshed it out and got it really working. And he's running security audit reports with it. So maybe we'll have something useful to get back there. And I think he was working with Corey already to fix bugs that he found. So I've also then brought up Conformity and Janitor Monkey and ICE. So ICE I just got up yesterday, and then I figured out we had to hook it to our, we have a consolidation account. Netflix has the same kind of thing, but we actually have a whole bunch of teams. We're even more chaotic than Netflix, sort of freedom and responsibility and chaos all together. So many teams have created their own AWS account, and they get wrapped up under a consolidation account that takes care of billing. But nobody really kept track of, well, who's doing what and what teams are using what resources, and really having a good picture of it. So when I pulled that up, all of a sudden there's this big report with a dozen accounts all spending all different things in different regions. Like, whoa, look at that. So that was kind of fun. Yeah, now I'm trying to figure out some nice DNS strategies. So how are we going to do subdomains so we can have nice, pretty names like, discovery.uswest1.test.netflix.net that you guys have. And how to do that for tools that are internal facing in the VPC versus public facing stuff. That's kind of the fun stuff. But we're also, so other guys now, oops, sorry, go ahead.
That brings us to a topic that we should get to. We only have 5 minutes left in the scheduled time here. If you want to hear a lot more about what Carl's doing at Riot with our stuff and with other stuff, next Wednesday, Netflix is having a meetup on site, which will probably be broadcast on YouTube as well, if you're not able to make it out here. But Carl, you mentioned you're planning on figuring out how to. Oh, I forgot to show the hammer. Carl gave me this hammer as part of a present for getting, well, for my birthday, but for getting Asgard open sourced, and it makes noise. That's very important. So it's still making noise. What we're going to work on next, it includes Route 53 support, so that you can use Asgard to change your DNS if you're willing to use Amazon's DNS service, Route 53. Because we have enough stuff internally that uses Route 53 for accessing our tools, like Carl was saying, discovery.uswest1.prod.netflix.something. So all that stuff is a bit of a pain to do on the command line or with some Python scripts, and even people who really like the command line have asked for, can we just have a form GUI that's kind of the same as everything else that we can change on the fly. We're probably not going to want people to be doing it a lot for our production stuff, but definitely for our tools and stuff, it'll be pretty useful. And then there's
the thing to put behind the authentication barrier.
Yeah, if we put authorization in there, then we can limit who can do stuff, which is probably going to be a good idea. And but then there's also something called Denominatrix, which is I believe it's going to be open sourced soon-ish. It's a web service on top of Denominator, which is our open source library for talking to multiple DNS providers. And eventually there's going to be a GUI for that. It may go into Asgard. We're still talking about where it should go, but there should be a GUI of some kind there. Marcus says, very keen on Route 53 integration. Yeah, it's kind of like if you're routing things through ELBs, you kind of wish that you could also make a pretty name as well through this interface. Let's see here.
It's especially useful when your names can actually be formulaic, sort of. You can actually construct a name based on information you know about your context. Not just human readable, but actually programmatic.
I don't know if we'll be enforcing the naming conventions, but
sure.
Yeah, you'd want that so that your various things talking to each other can dynamically generate those names, and so new context will just magically work. And with our remaining time, I want to see if Clay can talk about what he's working on, because it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, so I've got 2 minutes. So maybe the next time I could give a demo on this. We'll have this figured out a little better and do some screen sharing. But basically, I'm about to wrap up. I'm about to wrap up enough to make a pull request and maybe a hidden feature in Asgard for auto deployment. So this is, internally we call this red-black push, and it's basically, you can do this in Asgard now, but it's a lot of small granular steps, and everybody does it a little differently. So you're in a cluster, you're going to make a next ASG. You can create a next ASG right now, and it's basically uses the previous ASG as a template and lets you override some attributes. And the thing about this is you may not want to do it right now. You may want to delay. You may want to have it do a canary testing. That's an internal term which means put one instance or some minimal number of instances in this ASG and let it run for a while. Maybe collect metrics on it. Maybe use something outside to figure out if it's healthy or not. Whatever your definition of healthy is. And then you may want it to scale up all the way, and you may want to test it, wait, and let it run again for a little while. You probably want to disable traffic to the previous one so that this new one has the full traffic, and maybe let it run it for some amount of time. Eventually, you've deemed this new ASG healthy, and it's good. But something could have gone wrong in that process, and you would have wanted to roll back. So that's a lot of clicking around Asgard. That's a lot of refreshes of seeing if something's finished yet. Maybe even pulling out your iPhone and asking Siri to tell you when 2 hours have passed, so you can come back and check on your ASG. So we're using a new feature of a new Amazon service called, and I'm out of time right now, but I'm almost done.
No, we can go over time. It's not a hard limit.
So we're using simple workflow service from Amazon to do this, and it does the heavy lifting of timers, saying, you know, it's not tying up threads. There you go. You got to use your sign. Yeah. It's really handy for this. It keeps all the information about what Asgard's doing out of memory. Right now, we just keep up with this in memory, and that's problematic. Say if you're switching from one Asgard machine to one Asgard server to another. We spend a lot of times. Actually, we've written scripts that say, wait until this is done with all its tasks before you jump over to this new Asgard that's running over here, right? That's kind of a moot point if those same tasks are in SWF, Simple Workflow Service, because it's all outside our Asgard. It's not in memory anymore. And it lets us do things like timers and without tying up threads in the web application, and has handy retries, lots of features that you'd want in a workflow. And we've built a little groovy library that we will hopefully release on its own that helps us get rid of some of the boilerplate code of Simple Workflow Service when we're actually writing these workflows. Our first workflow will be the auto deployment feature. Did that leave anything out?
No, that's a very good description. That's going to be very possibly Asgard 2.0, because it's really going to be very substantially different experience for using it to do deployments that are based on ASGs, because you fill out one form and tell it how you want the rest of the next day or two to go, and it actually will do all of it for you, including ask you questions along the way if you want it to,
yes.
Skip questions if you don't want it to. As Carl points out in the chat room, one thing about SWF, it ties you even tighter to Amazon Web Services. Absolutely, it does.
Yes.
We're completely tied to Amazon Web Services at the moment because we're using auto-scaling groups, which aren't yet implemented by the competing cloud services. And Asgard's purpose is to make Amazon easier to use. You currently work on Eucalyptus 3.3, he says. Yes. So we've already talked to the Eucalyptus team about the fact that if they want to support Asgard, they need to have auto-scaling groups, and they need to have CloudWatch, and they need to have a bunch of the services mocked out or working correctly to do things that Netflix would need them to do, or just to be Amazon compatible. And they're already thinking about how to implement the Simple Workflow Service as well, so that they won't be missing this feature of Asgard in the future.
Yeah, and we've also talked about potentially having a local implementation of our workflows that don't actually use Simple Workflow Service, and that would be handy just for testing locally. But if we put enough time into it, it may actually be a viable runtime configuration.
Yeah, and there's a few reasons to do that. There's for unit testing and integration testing locally, as well as if there's any surprises with Simple Workflow Service and we want to be able to just go back to being in memory, that might be useful. And if people really can't use Amazon for one reason or another, then they might want to have it in memory and just have all the state stored in there. But the reality is that using Amazon to hold your state, even if you are in a different cloud, it doesn't mean that much of a difference. It just means that you need an Amazon account that that can run these executions, so that they're running somewhere. It doesn't mean that your deployments have to be in Amazon. It just means that your that's the place where the workflow happens to be implemented and where you might start using it. Just like you could use your list of applications could be stored in Amazon even if you're using Eucalyptus and storing all of your actual instances in your data center. So we're out of time, and we're going to wrap this up now. But thank you, everybody, for coming and for watching. And this will be on YouTube. If nothing goes wrong, this should get recorded and uploaded to my YouTube channel, and then I'll try to edit it and copy it over to the Netflix open source channel. And we're probably going to end up doing this on the second Wednesday of every month. So please put comments in the YouTube channel or the Google group, or tweet to Asgard OSS, and we'll be announcing the URL for the next one and stuff like that, so you can sign up for reminders and things on Twitter, which I'm trying to clear this thing out so that I can show you that thing to the Twitter account to follow. Oh, there's the reflection of my screen. This is not as good of a plan as I thought. But if you follow it on Twitter, we'll be talking about features as they come out and about when we'll be doing our next Hangout. And so thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. And Clay, you had any sign-off message for us?
No, this went well.
I think it went pretty well. People seem to have some interesting questions. There was a complaint on Twitter, perhaps facetiously, that we got some softball questions, and that people should challenge us a little more with something a little more controversial next time. So hope to see more of you again. Please tell your friends to check us out if you think that they might be interested. And everybody have a fantastic summer afternoon.